Bear Creek, Minnesota, 1898. Alice Sterling pressed her back against the Ferry house door as the windstorm tore a shingle loose and sent it spinning past her face like a blade. The river crossing was supposed to be a 2-hour stop, a chance to photograph the northern plains before winter swallowed them whole. But the wind had other plans. Now the ferry was chained down. The crossing master had fled to the main house, and Alice was trapped in a one-room cabin with a stranger who carried a leather satchel like it held his life inside. The man stood by the window, watching the storm with the kind of stillness that said he was used to trouble. His sandy brown hair was wind-tangled, his wool coat travel-worn, and his jaw set in a way that made Alice grip her camera case tighter. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, the silence felt dangerous. Alice set her camera case on the narrow cot and turned to face him.
I am Alice Sterling, traveling photographer. I was told this cabin was empty.
The man did not turn from the window.
It was. I got here first. Jonah Chambers. Newsman.
His voice was steady, but his hand rested on the satchel like it might run off. Alice crossed her arms.
The crossing master said the ferry would not run again until the wind dies. Could be days.
Could be.
He finally looked at her. His eyes were a clear gray, the kind that saw too much and said too little. Alice had photographed enough liars to know when a man was hiding something. Jonah Chambers was hiding plenty. The cabin shook as a gust slammed into it. Dust sifted from the rafters. Alice moved to the small stove and checked the wood supply. 3 logs. Maybe enough for one night if they were careful.
We will need to ration the heat. And the food, if you have any. I have hardtack and dried apples.
I have jerky and coffee. We can share.
He said it like a treaty, not an offer. Alice nodded. Outside, something metal clanged loose and rolled away. The wind was tearing the crossing apart piece by piece. She pulled off her gloves and set them on the table, then noticed the corner of a paper sticking out from under Jonah's satchel. It was folded tight, but the edge showed part of a map. Alice looked up. Jonah was watching her.
You are wondering what I am carrying.
I am wondering why a newsman needs a map that he guards like gold.
Because it is worth more than gold to the wrong people.
He pulled the satchel closer. Alice sat on the cot and studied him. His coat was good quality, but old. His boots were worn through at the heels, and his hands had ink stains that did not wash out. A working newsman, not a rich one.
What story are you chasing?
The kind that gets men killed.
He said it flat. No drama. Alice felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm.
Then why chase it?
Because someone has to.
The wind howled. The cabin groaned. Alice lay back on the cot and closed her eyes, but she did not sleep. She listened to Jonah move around the cabin, checking the door latch, testing the window frame, settling onto the floor with his back against the wall and his satchel in his lap. A man who did not trust walls or floors or anyone. The storm raged all night. By morning, the wind had dropped to a mean whine, and pale gray light seeped through the gaps in the boards. Alice woke to the smell of coffee. Jonah had the stove going, and a dented pot balanced on top. He handed her a tin cup without a word. She took it and sipped. It was strong and bitter, and exactly what she needed.
Thank you.
We are stuck together. Might as well be civil.
Alice stood and looked out the window. The ferry was still chained, but the crossing master's house was missing half its roof. Debris littered the mud. No one was moving outside.
The town must be in bad shape.
Bear Creek was already in bad shape before the storm. Hard winter. Stores are bare. Tempers are short.
You know the town?
I know what I need to know.
He poured himself coffee and sat back down, his satchel beside him. Alice set her cup on the table and opened her camera case. The plates were intact. The lens was clean. She had been hired to photograph homesteads and river crossings for a railroad survey. But the storm had put that on hold. Now she was stuck with a man who talked in riddles and carried secrets. She closed the case and turned to him.
If we are going to be trapped here, I would like to know what I am trapped with. What is in the satchel?
Jonah looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into the satchel and pulled out a folded map and a wanted poster. He spread them on the table. The map showed rail lines, river crossings, and a cluster of marks around Bear Creek. The wanted poster showed a man with sandy brown hair, a strong jaw, and clear eyes. The resemblance to Jonah was exact. Alice stared.
That is... you.
That is not me.
He said it with iron certainty. Alice picked up the poster. The name on it was James Collier. The crime was train robbery. The reward was $500.
But it looks exactly like you.
I know. That is the problem.
Alice set the poster down carefully.
Who is James Collier?
A man who does not exist. Or he did once, and someone stole his face. Or someone made him up to cover their tracks. I have been chasing this story for 6 months. Every lead points here. Bear Creek.
And the map?
Rail schedules. Shipment routes. Payroll deliveries. Someone is planning a train heist, and they are going to pin it on me. Because I look like the man on that poster.
Alice sat down slowly. Her mind raced. A wanted poster that looked like him but was not him. A map that proved a heist plot. A storm that trapped them together. This was not luck. This was a trap.
Who else knows you are here?
No one. I came in quiet. But someone will figure it out. They always do.
And when they do?
They will send hired guns to make sure I do not talk.
Alice looked at the map again. The marks around Bear Creek were clustered near the ferry crossing. Near here.
The heist is happening soon.
Within days. Maybe hours. The storm is cover. No one is watching. No one is moving. Perfect time to strike.
And you think you can stop it?
I think I can expose it. If I live long enough.
Alice stood and paced the small cabin. She had photographed homesteads and river towns and families who had nothing but hope. She had seen what happened when powerful men decided to take what they wanted. She was not going to stand by and let it happen again.
Then, we stop it. Together.
You do not owe me anything.
I owe this town. And I owe myself. I did not come out here to take pretty pictures. I came to see what is real. This is real.
Jonah looked at her with something like respect.
All right, but you need to know what we are up against. The man behind this is Leland Pendleton. He is the mine accountant in Bear Creek. Cooking books, forcing homesteaders off valuable ground. He uses hired guns to keep people scared. He is a reckless gambler, and he never forgets a slight. I wrote a story about him 6 months ago. He has been hunting me ever since.
And the heist?
Payroll train. $3,000. Enough to buy land, bribe officials, and bury anyone who asks questions. He will use the money to force out the last homesteaders before the spring roundup starts. If he succeeds, Bear Creek dies.
Alice picked up the wanted poster again.
And he made this to frame you.
Or to make sure no one believes me when I talk. Either way, I am a dead man if I get caught.
The wind picked up again, rattling the walls. Alice folded the poster and handed it back to Jonah.
Then, we make sure you do not get caught. We clear your name and stop the heist.
You make it sound simple.
It is not. But it is necessary.
Jonah tucked the poster and map back into the satchel.
We need to get to town. Find the sheriff. Show him the evidence.
The sheriff works for Pendleton. Half the town does.
Then, we find someone who does not.
Alice thought fast. The crossing master was gone. The ferry was chained. The storm was still howling. But there was another way.
There is a wagon road along the river. It floods in spring, but in winter it is passable. If we can make it to town on foot, we can reach the church. The pastor does not answer to anyone.
How far?
3 miles. Maybe 4.
In this wind?
Do we have a choice?
Jonah stood and shouldered the satchel.
No. We do not.
They left the cabin an hour later, wrapped in every layer they had. The wind was brutal, tearing at their coats and filling their eyes with grit. Alice led the way along the wagon road, her camera case strapped across her back. Jonah stayed close, one hand on the satchel, the other shielding his face. The river was a churning gray snake beside them. Twice they had to stop and brace against the wind. Once they saw a chimney collapse in the distance, bricks tumbling like dice. No one was outside. No one was watching. They were alone in the storm. It took 2 hours to reach the edge of Bear Creek. The town was battered. Roofs were torn, fences were down, and a water tower had tipped sideways like a drunk. Alice spotted the church steeple still standing and pointed. Jonah nodded. They cut through an alley and came out behind the church. The back door was unlocked. Inside, it was quiet and dim. Rows of wooden pews, a simple altar, a cross on the wall. The pastor was lighting candles. He was an older man with silver hair and steady hands. He turned when he heard them enter. "Pastor, we need help." The pastor looked them over, wind-battered and mud-streaked. The pastor gestured to a pew. "Sit. Tell me." Alice and Jonah sat. Jonah pulled out the map and the wanted poster. He laid them on the pew between them.
My name is Jonah Chambers. I am a newsman. This poster is a fake. Someone made it to frame me and cover up a train heist. The man behind it is Leland Pendleton.
The pastor picked up the poster and studied it. The pastor set the poster down and looked at the map. The pastor said Pendleton had been pressuring homesteaders for months. Families were leaving. The town was dying. If the heist succeeded, Pendleton would own everything. The pastor folded the map carefully. The pastor said he would take the evidence to the territorial marshal in the next town. It was a day's ride, maybe 2 in the storm, but the train was due tonight. They did not have 2 days.
We need to stop the heist before it happens.
The pastor shook his head. The The pastor said it was too dangerous. Pendleton had hired guns. They would kill anyone who interfered. Alice stood.
Then, we do not interfere. We document. I am a photographer. If we can catch them in the act, we have proof. Real proof. Not just maps and accusations.
That is insane.
That is the only way.
Jonah looked at her. Then at the pastor. Then at the map.
Where is the train stopping?
The pastor pointed to a mark on the map. The water tower at the edge of town. It was used for refueling. The train would stop there for 15 minutes.
That is where they will hit it.
Then that is where we need to be.
The pastor tried to argue, but Alice was already moving. She checked her camera case. The plates were good. The lens was clean. She had 3 exposures left. It would have to be enough. Jonah stood and shouldered the satchel.
If we do this, we do it smart. We get in. We get the photograph. We get out. No heroes.
Agreed.
They left the church through the back door and circled toward the water tower. The wind was still fierce, but the worst of the storm had passed. The sky was a bruised purple, and the light was failing fast. They reached the tower just as the sun dropped below the horizon. The train was due in an hour. Alice found a position behind a stack of barrels near the tracks. Jonah crouched beside her. They waited. The wind moaned. The tower creaked. Then, they heard voices. 3 men on horseback, rifles across their saddles. Alice recognized the lead rider. Leland Pendleton. He was a lean man with cold eyes and a gambler's smile. He dismounted and checked his pocket watch. Pendleton told his men to wait for the train. When it stopped, they would board, take the payroll, and disappear before anyone knew what happened. The wanted poster would make sure Jonah took the blame. One of the hired guns asked what if someone saw them. Pendleton laughed. Pendleton said no one would see them. The storm had everyone hiding, and if anyone did see, they would not talk. Not if they wanted to live. Alice set up her camera on the tripod. Her hands were steady. She had photographed worse. She framed the shot. Pendleton and his men by the water tower. The train tracks in the foreground. The stormy sky behind. She waited for the moment. Then the train whistle sounded in the distance. Pendleton and his men mounted up. The train came around the bend, slowing for the water tower. Alice triggered the shutter. The flash powder ignited with a sharp crack. Pendleton spun in his saddle. Pendleton shouted. The hired guns kicked their horses forward. Alice grabbed the camera and ran. Jonah was right behind her. They cut through the alley and ducked into a shed. The hired guns thundered past. Alice set the camera down carefully and pulled the exposed plate.
I got it. I got the shot.
Good. Now we need to survive long enough to use it.
They heard shouts. Boots on wood. The hired guns were searching the sheds. Alice looked around. No back door, no windows, just a pile of old tools and a broken wagon wheel. Jonah pulled a wrench from the pile and handed Alice a length of pipe.
If they come in, we fight.
If they come in, we are dead.
Then, we make sure they do not come in.
He wedged the door shut with the wagon wheel and stacked tools against it. Alice checked the exposed plate. It was intact. If they could get it developed, it would prove everything. If they lived. The door rattled. Someone kicked it. The tools shifted. Jonah braced his shoulder against the wheel.
Go out the roof. There is a gap in the boards. Climb up and run.
I am not leaving you.
You have the proof. That is all that matters.
You matter.
The door splintered. A hired gun shoved his rifle through the gap. Jonah grabbed the barrel and yanked. The gun fired wild. Alice swung the pipe and hit the man's arm. He cursed and pulled back. Jonah kicked the door shut again.
Go. Now.
Alice climbed onto the broken wagon and reached for the roof gap. She pulled herself through and onto the shed roof. The wind hit her like a fist. She looked back. Jonah was climbing up behind her. The hired guns burst into the shed below. Alice and Jonah ran across the rooftops. The town was a maze of low buildings and narrow alleys. They jumped gaps, slid down slopes, and kept moving. Behind them, the hired guns shouted and fired. Bullets whined past. Alice did not look back. They reached the church and dropped into the alley. The pastor was waiting. The pastor pulled them inside and barred the door. The pastor said the marshal was on his way. He had sent word by telegraph before the storm cut the lines. But it would be morning before he arrived. They had to hold out until then.
Pendleton will come here.
The pastor said he knew. That was why he had gathered the homesteaders. Families who had been forced off their land. Families who wanted justice. They were waiting in the church. 24 men and women, armed with hunting rifles and old revolvers. Not an army, but enough. Alice set the exposed plate on the altar.
This is the proof. Pendleton and his men at the water tower, waiting to rob the train. If we can develop it, we can show the marshal.
The pastor said there was a dark room in the schoolhouse. The teacher did photography lessons. It was 2 blocks away. Alice looked at Jonah.
I need to go.
Then, I go with you.
The pastor assigned 2 homesteaders to escort them. They slipped out the side door and moved through the alleys. The town was dark and quiet. Too quiet. They reached the schoolhouse and found the dark room. Alice worked fast. She mixed the chemicals, developed the plate, and fixed the image. It was perfect. Pendleton and his men, clear as day. Proof. She wrapped the plate in cloth and tucked it into her coat.
Done.
They left the schoolhouse and started back. Halfway to the church, they heard horses. Pendleton and his hired guns blocking the alley. Pendleton dismounted. Pendleton said he knew what they had. He wanted the plate. If they gave it to him, he would let them walk away. If they did not, he would kill them and burn the church with everyone inside.
You are a coward, Pendleton. You always were.
Pendleton smiled. Pendleton said he was a businessman, and business was about knowing when to cut losses. Jonah was a loss. So was Alice. So were the homesteaders. He had already lost the payroll train. The law would come, but if he erased the evidence, he could disappear before they arrived.
You will not get away.
Pendleton drew a revolver. Pendleton said he already had. The hired guns raised their rifles. Alice felt the weight of the plate in her coat. She looked at Jonah. He looked back. And then the church bell rang. Once, twice, 3 times. The signal. The homesteaders were coming. Pendleton hesitated. The hired guns looked back. and in that moment, Jonah and Alice ran. They ducked into a side alley as gunfire erupted behind them. The homesteaders poured out of the church, rifles blazing. Pendleton and his men scattered. Alice and Jonah kept running. They reached the church and dove inside. The pastor barred the door. Outside, the battle raged. Gunfire and shouts and the thunder of hooves. Alice clutched the plate. Jonah reloaded his revolver. They waited. The gunfire lasted 10 minutes. Then silence. The pastor opened the door carefully. The homesteaders were standing in the street, rifles still raised. Pendleton and his men were gone. One hired gun lay dead in the mud. The others had fled. Alice stepped outside. The storm had finally broken. The sky was clearing, stars appearing one by one. Jonah stood beside her.
Is it over?
Not yet.
The marshal arrived at dawn. He was a tall man with a badge and a reputation. He took the photographic plate, the map, and the wanted poster. He listened to Jonah's story and the pastor's testimony. He questioned the homesteaders. By noon, he had issued warrants for Pendleton and his hired guns. By sunset, Pendleton was in custody. He had tried to board a train in the next town. The conductor recognized him from Alice's photograph. The hired guns were rounded up over the next 2 days. The wanted poster of James Collier was declared a forgery. Jonah's name was cleared. The homesteaders returned to their land. Bear Creek began to heal. Alice stayed to document it. She photographed families rebuilding, children playing in the mud, the church bell ringing on Sunday morning. And she photographed Jonah, standing by the river Ferry, watching the water flow past. On Sunday morning, 1 week after the storm, Alice and Jonah stood in the church doorway after the service. The congregation filed past, shaking their hands, thanking them. The pastor waited until everyone was gone. Then he handed Jonah a deed. The pastor said the homesteaders had taken up a collection. They bought a small plot of land on the edge of town. It was not much, but it was theirs. A place to start.
I do not understand.
The pastor smiled. The pastor said it was a gift. For saving the town, for giving them hope, for proving that one person could make a difference.
We did it together.
The pastor nodded. The pastor said he knew. That was why the deed had 2 names on it: Alice Sterling and Jonah Chambers. Side by side. Alice looked at Jonah. He looked at the deed. Then, at her.
I do not have anything to offer. I am a newsman with ink-stained hands and too many enemies.
I am a photographer who lives out of a trunk and chases trouble. I think we match.
You deserve better.
I deserve you. If you will have me.
Jonah set the deed on the doorframe and took her hands.
I will have you. For as long as you will let me.
Then, you are stuck with me.
He kissed her. Gentle at first, then deeper. Alice felt the weight of the week lift. The fear, the danger, the desperation. It was over. They were alive. And they were together. When they broke apart, the pastor was smiling. The pastor said he could perform a ceremony right now if they wanted, or they could wait. It was up to them.
What do you think?
I think I have waited long enough.
The pastor married them in the church doorway, with the spring sun breaking through the clouds and the town watching from the street. Alice wore her traveling dress. Jonah wore a clean shirt borrowed from the pastor. They spoke their vows with steady voices and clear eyes. When the pastor pronounced them married, Jonah kissed Alice again, and the town cheered. That evening, they stood by the river Ferry, watching the water flow past. The crossing was open again. The ferry was running. Life was returning to Bear Creek. Alice leaned against Jonah's shoulder.
What will you do now?
Right. There are more stories to tell, more wrongs to right.
And I will photograph them. We make a good team.
The best.
He wrapped his arm around her. The wind was gentle now, carrying the scent of wet earth and new growth. The storm was over. The danger had passed. And they were home. They signed the deed that night, side by side, in the church by candlelight. The pastor witnessed. The homesteaders raised a glass, and Alice and Jonah began their life together, building a home on the edge of Bear Creek, where the river ran clear and the sky stretched wide. Two people who had been alone, now together. Two stories that had become one, and a love forged in the heart of a storm, unbreakable and true. The land stretched before them, wild and open. Alice set up her dark room in the cabin's back room. Jonah built a desk by the window where he could write with the morning light. They worked side by side, documenting the truth of the frontier, her photographs, and his words, together telling stories that needed to be told. The railroad came through that spring, bringing new settlers and new challenges. But Bear Creek had survived the storm, and so had they.
Another story breaking. Land dispute south of town.
I will pack my camera.
She smiled at him across the breakfast table. He smiled back. Partners in every sense of the word. The work was dangerous. The frontier was unforgiving. But they had each other, and that made all the difference. The months passed. Summer brought heat and drought. Fall brought harvest and plenty. Winter brought snow and quiet. And through it all, Alice and Jonah built their life together. They documented the land rush, the homesteader's struggles, the small victories, and the larger injustices. Her camera captured what his pen described. Together they became the conscience of the northern plains, the voice of the voiceless, the witnesses to history. On a cold December morning, a year after the storm, Alice woke to find Jonah already at his desk, writing. She poured coffee and brought him a cup.
What are you working on?
A new series. About the people who built this place. The real stories, not the legends.
I will photograph them.
I know you will.
He pulled her close and kissed her. Outside the window, the plains stretched white and endless under a pale blue sky. Inside, the fire burned warm and steady, and two hearts beat as one, bound by love and purpose, facing the future together. The work continued. The stories kept coming, and through it all, Alice and Jonah stood together, two souls who had found each other in the heart of a storm and built something lasting in its wake. The frontier was harsh and unforgiving, but love was stronger. Truth was worth fighting for, and together, they would keep fighting, keep documenting, keep bearing witness to the changing world around them. Partners, lovers, witnesses to history, and above all, home, colorized late 1800s American West photograph. Natural light, gentle contrast, slightly soft focus, subtle film grain, faint dust/scratches, slight vignetting, no text, no watermark. Church doorway after Sunday service. A young woman in her 30s with dark auburn hair pinned back, wearing her best dark green dress, and a young man in his 30s with sandy brown hair, wearing a brown suit, stand close together in the doorway, shaking hands with departing congregation members. Bright afternoon, sunlight, simple wooden church building, homesteader families visible in background, accepted and respected members of the community, belonging and love evident in their expressions. Pea Spring came to Bear Creek with a rush of melting snow and mud-choked roads. Alice and Jonah worked through the thaw, documenting the rebirth of the town. The train line was secure now, running on schedule, bringing supplies and new settlers. The homesteaders who had nearly lost everything were planting again, their fields rich with promise. And Pendleton's name had become a warning, a cautionary tale told in saloons and kitchens across the territory.
We did something good here.
We exposed the truth. That matters.
It does. But there is more work to do, more stories to tell.
Alice nodded, adjusting her camera on its tripod. They stood on the bluff above town, capturing the spring landscape for Jonah's next article. The wind was warm now, carrying the scent of new grass and wildflowers. Below them, Bear Creek bustled with life. Children played in the street. Merchants reopened their shops. And the ferry ran steady across the swollen river, connecting the town to the wider world.
Where next?
Wherever the story takes us.
She smiled and reached for his hand. They had built something here, something real and lasting. A partnership forged in danger and sealed in love. And as they stood together on that bluff, looking out over the land they had helped save, Alice knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The frontier was still wild, still dangerous, still full of injustice and corruption. But they had each other. They had their purpose. And they had the courage to keep fighting for what was right. By summer, their reputation had spread beyond Bear Creek. Newspapers across the territory picked up Jonah's articles. Alice's photographs appeared in magazines and journals, documenting the real life of the frontier. They received letters from other towns, pleas for help, stories that needed telling. And they answered every call. In July, they traveled south to investigate a land office scandal. In August, they exposed a corrupt Indian agent stealing supplies meant for reservation families. In September, they documented the plight of Chinese railroad workers facing violent discrimination. Each story brought danger. Each investigation made enemies. But they never wavered, never backed down, never stopped seeking the truth. And through it all, their love deepened, strengthened by shared purpose and mutual respect.
Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had not taken shelter in that cabin.
I would have found you anyway. Somehow.
You are certain?
Completely. Some things are meant to be.
She laughed and kissed him, there in the dusty hotel room in some nameless frontier town. Far from home, but never alone. Because home was not a place anymore. Home was wherever they were together. Autumn brought them back to Bear Creek. The harvest was good that year, the best anyone could remember. The town threw a celebration, and Alice and Jonah were guests of honor. They danced in the street under lantern light while fiddles played and children laughed. The homesteaders they had helped save raised toasts to their health. The sheriff shook Jonah's hand and thanked him for his courage. And through it all, Alice felt a deep contentment settle in her bones. This was what they had fought for. This joy, this community, this simple celebration of survival and hope.
Happy? I see they're warned and interesting she were tans off for some time, compared to less of the time. The war the wind stas but that 4 year in love corns. There were their love place, with a lust lot's mark again.
Very.
Good. Because I have something to ask you.
He led her away from the crowd, out to the edge of the ferry landing where they had stood so many times before. The river flowed dark and steady under the stars. And when he turned to face her, his eyes were bright with emotion.
Marry me. Truly marry me. Not just for the deed or the appearances, but because I love you, and I want to spend every day of my life with you.
Yes. Always yes.
He kissed her then, deep and long, and the crowd erupted in cheers. They had been watching, of course, the whole town waiting for this moment. And when Jonah and Alice finally broke apart, laughing and breathless, they were surrounded by friends, by family, by the community they had helped build. The wedding was planned for December, in the same church where they had signed the deed, a year and a day after the storm that had brought them together. A year and a day after their lives had changed forever. And as autumn turned to winter once more, Alice and Jonah continued their work, documenting the frontier, exposing corruption, telling the stories that needed telling. But now, they did it as an engaged couple, as partners in every sense of the word, building a future together, one story at a time. Came early that year, fierce and unrelenting. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, and the wind howled through the cracks. But inside, Alice and Jonah were warm. They worked by lamplight, preparing for the wedding, planning their next series of articles, dreaming of the life they would build together.
I never thought I would find this. Someone who understands what I do, who sees the world the way I see it.
We are the same, you and I. We cannot look away from the truth, even when it is hard, even when it is dangerous.
And we will not stop.
No, we will not stop.
December arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. The wedding was set for the 15th, and the whole town was invited. Alice spent hours with the homesteader women, stitching her dress, a simple white gown with lace at the collar. Jonah borrowed a proper suit from the general store owner, black wool with a white shirt and string tie. And on the morning of the wedding, they woke in separate rooms for the last time, knowing that by nightfall they would be husband and wife in truth. The church was packed, every pew filled with homesteaders, miners, shopkeepers, farmers, people they had helped, people who had helped them, people who simply wanted to witness this union born of storm and struggle. The pastor stood at the altar, beaming, and when Alice walked down the aisle, her hand on the arm of the ferry operator who had become like a father to her, Jonah thought his heart would burst. She was beautiful beyond words. Her dark auburn hair crowned with winter flowers, her face glowing with joy.
You are everything.
And you are mine.
They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices. No hesitation, no doubt. Just two people pledging their lives to each other before God and community. And when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. Jonah kissed Alice, long and deep, sealing the promise they had made. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and gentle, covering the world in white. They walked through it hand in hand, laughing as friends and neighbors threw rice and cheered. The celebration moved to the community hall, where tables groaned under the weight of food and drink. Fiddles struck up a lively tune, and Jonah swept Alice onto the dance floor. They spun and swayed, lost in each other, the rest of the world fading away.
I love you.
I love you. Always.
As the night wore on, they slipped away, walking back to their cabin through the falling snow. The town was quiet now, peaceful. Smoke rose from chimneys. Lights glowed in windows, and Alice and Jonah stepped into their home, closing the door on the cold and the world, beginning their life together in warmth and love. They had faced danger and won. They had fought corruption and prevailed. And now they had this, a life built on truth and partnership, a love forged in the heart of a storm. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and bringing green shoots to the prairie. Alice discovered she was with child in March, and Jonah's joy was boundless. He built a cradle from oak wood, carved with careful hands, while Alice sewed tiny clothes and prepared their home for the new life to come. The homesteaders brought gifts, blankets and toys, welcoming the baby before it even arrived. And through it all, the work continued. Alice photographed less now, mindful of her condition, but she still documented the important moments, the town meetings and land disputes, the celebrations and sorrows. Jonah's articles grew sharper, more focused. He had found his true calling, not just chasing stories, but building community through truth. They traveled less, staying close to Bear Creek, building their home and their family. But the work never stopped. There were always stories to tell, always wrongs to right, always truth to uncover. One warm April afternoon, a stranger rode into town. He was tall and weathered, with a U.S. Marshal's badge pinned to his chest. He asked for Jonah Chambers, and Alice felt a cold finger of fear trace her spine. They had thought the danger was past. The threat ended with Pendleton's arrest. But the law had long memories, and Jonah had broken rules in pursuit of justice. The marshal sat with them in their cabin, his face grave. He explained that federal prosecutors wanted Jonah's testimony in a larger case, a conspiracy that reached far beyond Bear Creek. Pendleton had been part of something bigger, a network of corruption spanning 3 territories. And Jonah's evidence, his articles and documents, were key to bringing down the entire operation.
How long would I be gone?
The marshal hesitated. Months, possibly. The trial was in Chicago, scheduled for summer. They would need Jonah to testify, to present his findings, to face cross-examination from some of the best lawyers money could buy. Alice's hand instinctively went to her belly, where their child grew.
The baby comes in September.
The marshal nodded, understanding. He promised to arrange the schedule so Jonah could return before the birth. But there were no guarantees. Justice moved slowly, and trials could drag on. Jonah looked at Alice, and she saw the conflict in his eyes. This was everything he had fought for, the chance to expose corruption on a grand scale, to make a real difference. But it meant leaving her, leaving their home, at the most vulnerable time.
You have to go.
Alice.
You have to go. This is what we fought for. This is what matters. Truth and justice. I will be fine. The town will help. And you will come home to us.
He pulled her close, his face buried in her hair, and she felt him tremble.
I love you. I will come back. I swear it.
I know.
He left 2 weeks later, riding out with the marshal in the early morning light. Alice stood at the cabin door, watching until he disappeared over the horizon, one hand on her belly, the other pressed to her heart. The months that followed were the longest of her life. She threw herself into work, documenting the spring planting, the river flood that nearly destroyed the ferry, the barn raising that brought the whole community together. She wrote letters to Jonah every week, telling him about their child, about the town, about her hope for the future. His letters came back irregularly, delayed by distance and the chaos of the trial. But when they arrived, she read them over and over, memorizing every word. He wrote about the courtroom battles, the testimony that exposed decades of fraud and violence. The moment when Pendleton finally broke on the stand and confessed everything. He wrote about missing her, about dreaming of home, about counting the days until he could hold her again. Summer turned to autumn. The baby grew heavy inside her. And still, Jonah did not come. The trial dragged on, complications mounting. Alice tried not to worry, but fear gnawed at her. What if something went wrong? What if he couldn't make it back in time? The homesteaders rallied around her. The ferry operator's wife moved into the cabin, ready to help when the baby came. The doctor checked on her weekly. And the whole town waited, watching the road for Jonah's return. September arrived with golden light and cool winds. Alice felt the first pangs on a Sunday morning. Mild at first, then growing stronger. The midwife was summoned. The women gathered. And as the day wore on, Alice labored, praying that Jonah would arrive in time. The sun was setting when she heard the commotion outside. Voices shouting. Horses galloping. Through the haze of pain, she heard his voice.
Alice!
And then he was there, bursting through the door, covered in dust from days of hard riding, his face wild with fear and love. He dropped to his knees beside the bed, taking her hand.
I'm here. I'm here. I made it.
You made it.
Their daughter was born 2 hours later, small and perfect, with a crown of dark hair, and her father's eyes. Jonah held her for the first time, with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face.
She's perfect. You're perfect.
We're a family.
A family.
Alice reached up and touched his face, wiping away the tears. Outside, the town celebrated, ringing the church bell in joy. Inside the cabin, the three of them lay together in the lamplight. A family forged through storm and separation, through danger and devotion. Jonah told Alice about the trial's conclusion, how the network had been dismantled, how dozens of corrupt officials faced justice. His articles had changed laws, protected homesteaders across 3 territories, given voice to those who had none.
But none of it matters as much as this. As you. As her.
It all matters. That's what makes it real.
They named their daughter Hope, for the future they were building together. And as the first stars appeared in the autumn sky, Jonah and Alice held each other close, their baby sleeping between them, 3 hearts beating as one. The storm that had brought them together seemed a lifetime ago, but its lessons remained. Truth was worth fighting for. Love was worth every sacrifice. And together, there was nothing they couldn't face. In the years that followed, their family would grow. Their work would continue. And the story of the photographer and the newsman who found love in the heart of a Minnesota storm would become legend in Bear Creek. But that night, in the golden glow of lamplight, with their daughter sleeping peacefully and the whole town celebrating outside their door, Jonah and Alice simply held each other, grateful for every moment, every struggle, every triumph that had led them here. Home. Together. Forever.